When you ask people in Africa, what is the biggest problem in Africa? Many are going to tell you corruption and bad leadership. That's understandable. Those are big problems, but they are not the biggest. Imagine a group of people organizing a meeting on how to divide your land. And in that meeting, the owner of the land is not even a part of it. Later they come to your land, intimidate you with guns, and steal everything you have. And if you stand in their way, they will kill and destroy you without even hesitating. Then they decide to call your land their home for the better part of the century, while they subject the owners of the land to forced labor. And the harvest they get as a result of that forced labor, they grab it, they take it to their countries to build their European economies. That, my friends, is colonization summarized. The biggest problem that has ever faced Africa is the Berlin Conference, because colonization couldn't have even existed if it isn't for the Berlin Conference of 1884. And more so, the biggest problem is not only the Berlin Conference, but the legacy of the conference itself, where Germany, France, Portugal, Italy, Belgium, Spain congregated and decided to divide Africa into 54 little pieces that we have today, not caring about existing kingdoms and tribes, not caring about ancestral bloodlines, not caring about the different climates in the continent, not caring about the then socio-political and economic structures we had. Nothing. They divided Africa like a piece of cake and distributed it amongst themselves so that they can start their colonization spree that lasted for the better part of the 20th century. Today we are going to ask ourselves, does it make sense to live in a continent that its boundaries were not formed by people of that continent? And does it make sense to say that Africa is free, but we haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to the decolonization of African land and resources? Does it make sense to even think that Africa can succeed with 41 different currencies, 54 different countries that are competing with each other? We delve deeper into why the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 is the biggest issue that has ever faced the continent of Africa. In 1884, European powers came together in a meeting called the Berlin Conference, chaired by Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor at that time. Basically, they were trying to figure out which parts of Africa will go to British, will go to the French, will go to the Germans, will go to the Spaniards, will go to the Portuguese, will go to the Belgians. Other countries like Austria-Hungary, Russia, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, and the United States came home without any formal possessions in Africa. Mind you, there was no African in this meeting. America did actually participate in the Berlin Conference, but it did not ratify the treaty that resulted. The US sent representatives to Berlin to take part in the conference. Even though it did not have strong commercial interests in Africa at that time, policymakers thought that they might want to expand into Africa at some point. However, in the end, the US did not ratify the treaty because of domestic politics that took an anti-imperialist turn for a short time during the Grover Cleveland's presidency. They basically started colonizing Africa. They sucked all the raw materials to build their Europe. They even used colonization to reward the soldiers who fought in their wars with stolen African land. They even rewarded their politicians with stolen African land as well. But there's something that nobody realizes about this 1884 Berlin Conference. And that is, it wasn't just a meeting to discuss colonization. It was also a meeting to discuss neocolonization. Stay with me. These white people were so proactive, and that's why I keep on saying white supremacy is very proactive. They're always 10 steps ahead. When they were drafting a plan in the Berlin Conference of how they can colonize Africa, they also knew that one day these Africans will fight us. They knew one day that these Africans will fight for their freedom and they will chase us out and they will want to be independent. So they said, how are we going to rule them even after they're independent? Which is why when they were dividing Africa into those small little pieces, they foresaw a future whereby after independence, these Africans will keep their borders. They'll be stupid enough to keep their borders. And they'll also be stupid enough to compete with one another economically. And in them competing with one another economically, Kenya competing with Nigeria, Ghana competing with Senegal, I'm just using examples, South Africa competing with Nigeria, these stupid economic competitions happening in Africa will deter Africa from being an economic giant, because it will deter these African countries from uniting economically. Also, in them competing economically will deter the African citizens from focusing on the real enemy, from focusing on the real oppressor, which is white supremacy, that is stealing resources, that is busy oppressing them silently while they are busy competing with one another in the African continent. It was all by design. They foresaw this in the 1884 Berlin Conference. They saw this happening. Another thing that they foresaw, border conflicts. They knew that the more they chop up Africa into little pieces, when they get independence, they knew that these African countries will keep their borders. Not only that, but they will be selfish. And they'll only care about their countries and their countries only. So Kenya will only care about Kenya. Uganda will only care about Uganda. Ethiopia will only care about Ethiopia. And in that selfishness, the more these African countries are selfish of their borders, the higher chances of border conflicts breeding. Case in point, Congo and Rwanda and other border conflicts that are happening. In the middle of these border conflicts, while people are killing each other, while people are doing all sorts of things to each other, the white man is busy sucking the minerals. Again, people are distracted by the border conflict instead of them looking at the real oppressor, which is white supremacy. It was all by design, and they foresaw this in the Berlin Conference in 1884. Another thing they foresaw is xenophobia. They knew very well that these African countries, these African leaders being stupid enough to keep these borders, they knew very well that it will breed xenophobia. Case in point, South Africa. South Africans are frowning upon, well, not all of them, but, a sizable amount of them are frowning upon other Africans coming into South Africa and setting up businesses and settling there. So xenophobia is distracting Africans from the common enemy, which has always been white supremacy. They saw this happening, and it was all by design. It is all by design. In summary, what I'm trying to say is that they knew what they were doing, and everything was foresighted, and everything is going according to their plan that they formulated in the 1884 Berlin Conference. It was all by design. Another thing they foresaw is when they were chopping up Africa into those little pieces, they knew that the more we fragment Africa, when they get independence, the more these countries will not survive economically on their own. So what will they do? They'll come back to the same people who colonized them for loans and grants to start and run their countries. Are we doing that till today? Are African countries borrowing money from the European Union? Are African countries borrowing money from the US? Are African countries borrowing money from the World Bank and the IMF? Yes, we are. It is through loans, it is through grants that they are controlling us. They are no longer controlling us with guns and grenades, but through loans, grants, donations, through money. They foresaw us keeping these borders, and they foresaw the perils that will come from us keeping these borders, and they also foresaw how those perils will benefit them. It was all by design. So how do we eradicate the stench that is still here from the 1884 Berlin Conference? How do we unite as African people? Well, my suggestion is very simple. Start with the low-hanging fruit. All these regional blocks, SADC, ECOWAS, EAC, COMES, remove all of them. If there's one thing that I hate the most is these regional blocks. We cannot be serious. We cannot say that we are serious about uniting Africa while we still have regional blocks. What? Because all they do is EAC is competing with ECOWAS, or EAC is competing with SADC, and SADC is competing with ECOWAS, and all. What these regional blocks are doing is that they're competing with each other to oblivion and misery. Remove all these regional blocks, and we can have only one regional block, and that is a United States of Africa. That's the regional block that we should have. Now, before we even start any process of uniting African people, the first thing we need to do is by forming a common currency. A common African currency. Now, many people will ask me, and I know they'll ask me after this episode, how will we do it? I'm sure it's going to be hard. And I'm like, we have everything, basically. I don't have to tell you what we have. Everybody knows what Africa has. We have everything at our disposal. How can we not have a common currency by now? And that common currency will be backed by the minerals, by the vast gold deposits that we have, by the vast gold mines that we have. Come on! We have no excuse for us not to have a common currency. The common currency will be the foundation towards any activity, towards any initiative of uniting Africans. Once we have a common currency, that's when we can think about opening up the borders and Africans to travel in Africa freely. Did you know it's hard for me in Kenya to go to a country in Northern Africa, or even some countries in Western Africa, but it's easy for me to go to Dubai? So wait, it's hard for me to move easily in my own continent, but it's easy for me to move to another continent. This is embarrassing, and it needs to stop. This is the stupidity that I just hate. Open up the borders, let Africa move easily in their own continent. That is how we understand one another. That is how we interact with one another. That is how we use the common currency to trade with one another. That is how we love one another. That is how we understand one another. We don't even understand. We don't know each other in Africa. Let's be honest. We don't know each other. I saw a video. I don't know where I saw it. I don't know if it's on YouTube. A guy went to Gambia and he was asking the Gambian, do you know where Nairobi is? The guy doesn't know. And frankly, that is what is happening in most parts of Africa. We don't know each other. We don't know what's happening in Gambia. We don't know what's happening in Nigeria. We don't know what's happening in Lesotho. We don't know each other. And we call ourselves Africans, yet we don't even know each other, and we live in the same continent. It is embarrassing. Open up the borders after we form our own currency. Open up the borders. Then after that, we can now start thinking about speaking one language. There's togetherness. There's that energy that is transferred when people speak in one language. We need to speak one language as African people. I would suggest Swahili. Not because I'm a Kenyan and not because I've been speaking Swahili for long, since I was born. No. It's because Swahili is the most widely spoken African language. And and I know if you are committed to know Swahili, you will learn it within a year. And you'll be fluent after a year. We need to form a common African language. We need we have too many languages. People are speaking in too many languages. And we cannot be speaking in English with each other. Imagine a future where Africans are just speaking in one African language. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. We need to stop using European terms or European infrastructure or European structures so that we can understand one another. No. So, the foundation needs to be the common currency. Then follows dismantling all these useless travel restrictions in Africa so that we can move in Africa freely. Then after that, we can speak in one language. But all this needs to happen after we dismantle all these regional blocks. And I'm telling you, we will be free, man. We will be free. Most of our African problems stems from us being disunited. Most of our African problems stems from the scramble and partitioning of Africa that happened in 1884, where these white people chopped up Africa into little pieces, into 54 little pieces. If we just become serious and get rid of any legacy that is left of the 1884 Berlin Conference, we will be free overnight. We are busy solving corruption, we are busy solving bad leadership, we are busy solving xenophobia. But how can we solve all these African problems if we haven't solved the root cause of all these problems, which is the scramble which is basically Africa being disunited. And Africa is disunited because of the 1884 Berlin Conference, where Europeans chopped up Africa into little pieces. We need to do it, and we need to do it now. And like I keep on saying, we need to do it now, or else it will be too little too late. It is unfortunate that I'm starting to see that it will come a time where we will be at a point of no return, because I'm foreseeing colonization part 2. The West and the East are not even hiding the fact of the matter that they want to control Africa. And we are just busy sitting here like lame, lazy-ass ducks, waiting for whichever party to control us. Let me tell you something. Whichever party wins, it will be colonization part 2. And colonization part 2 will be harder to get out of than colonization part 1. So we need to start this process right now of uniting Africa. Otherwise, it will be too little, too late.